My name is Violet Rowan, and I learned the truth about my family in a single sentence. The moment I sat down, my parents didn't even bother easing into it. The money is gone, Violet. We've transferred the entire inheritance to your sister's family. Their voices were steady, rehearsed, almost proud of themselves. Then came the line that told me everything about how they saw me. You make good money now, so learn to share. They waited for me to break, or plead, or at least ask why. But I didn't give them that satisfaction. I just looked at them and said, "That's interesting." A tiny shift happened across the table, barely noticeable, but I caught it. A flicker of doubt. They didn't understand what my reaction meant, but I did. Because the moment those words left their mouths, something my grandmother once told me fell into perfect place. They thought they had taken everything. They thought I would simply accept it. They thought they finally had the leverage they'd been trying to force on me for years. And as they sat there waiting for me to fall apart, I slipped my hand beneath my collar and pressed my thumb against the small pendant resting there, the one holding a key my grandmother gave me long before any of this began. A key they didn't know existed. A key tied to something they would never think to look for. And that was their first mistake. If you want to know what my grandmother truly prepared and why this small key terrified an entire family, stay with me. The next part changes everything. By the time the morning light hit my windshield, my mind had already drifted back to the place where everything about me was shaped long before I ever understood what fairness should look like. Growing up in Tacoma didn't feel difficult in the ways people usually mean. It felt calculated, structured around a quiet expectation that I would make myself useful, while my sister Amelia enjoyed the space laid out for her like a runway. I learned to fold laundry before I learned multiplication, standing on a stool so I could reach the counter while my mother reminded me that the family needed me to be responsible. Every chore seemed to land in my hands, dishes sweeping, sorting mail tasks that were never phrased as requests. My mother would say almost casually, "Your sister has lessons to get to. Help out while she's busy." And Amelia always had something: piano classes, art workshops, weekend birthday parties with themes and performers. I watched new dresses arrive for her in bright boxes, while mine were the gently used ones she had grown out of, handed down with a smile and a reminder that I should be grateful. Even school supplies followed the same pattern. When she finished with a backpack, it became mine, the worn straps softened by her years of use. The message was subtle but constant. Amelia needed investment, and I needed to stay out of the way. The only person who seemed to look directly at me, really see me, was my grandmother Elise. Her house smelled faintly of cedar and old pages, a place where time felt slower, and the rules of the rest of the family didn't reach. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Instead, she taught me to observe before reacting, to hold steady when others tried to provoke urgency, and to recognize the strength in choosing silence when silence served me better than defense. She once told me, while we sat on her back porch listening to rain patter against the railings, that stillness could reveal truths louder than confrontation ever could. I didn't fully understand her then, but the way she said it stayed lodged in me, waiting for the moment it would matter. A few months before she passed, she called me into her room with a seriousness that didn't frighten me, but rooted me in place. She opened a small velvet pouch and placed a delicate pendant into my hand, one I had never seen her wear. When I turned it over, she guided my fingers to a small hidden hinge, revealing a tiny key tucked inside. She closed my hand around it and said quietly, "When they do something you never expect, you'll know exactly what to open." I asked her what she meant, but she only smiled the way she did when she wanted me to think rather than ask. The key felt impossibly small, yet the weight of her words wrapped around it like a warning I wouldn't understand until much later. Even now, as I pulled into my building's garage, those words echoed with a clarity that unsettled me, not because I feared them, but because I finally realized she had never been wrong. By the time I stepped into my office in the tech district that afternoon, the routine hum of keyboards and muted conversations barely registered, because the moment I set my bag down, my phone lit up with a long text from my sister Amelia, describing the starter home our parents had just helped her secure. She called it a gift to celebrate the next stage of her life, which was her way of saying she and her husband Evan were planning to have a baby soon and wanted space. Buried between the emojis and exclamation marks was the casual note that our parents had already covered the down payment, as if that were something people did on a quiet Tuesday. Not long after Evan appeared on a video call during our team's lunch break, leaning into the frame with the same half smirk he always used when he talked to me. He asked whether my little projects were still keeping me busy, a tone suggesting he didn't believe my job required real work compared to his sales role, which he liked to exaggerate every chance he got. Moments later, my parents called, their voices carrying an odd blend of firmness and expectation. They told me in the same practiced tone they'd used for years that I needed to step up and help the family more, now that Amelia was settling down. My mother slipped in her usual line, "You're the stable one, Violet," as if stability were a resource they were entitled to withdraw from without limit. I muted the phone before they finished and turned back to my monitors, telling myself to focus. But then an email notification appeared at the corner of my screen, and everything inside me stilled. The subject line read, "Unusual access attempt detected, Swiss private trust." I opened it slowly, scanning the message that outlined a triggered security alert tied to a vault registered under Elise Rowan's name. It stated that within the last 24 hours, someone had attempted to authenticate using outdated family credentials. The system had blocked the attempt, but flagged it as concerning. I reread the email twice, then a third time each pass, confirming the same detail. Whoever had tried to access Elise's files had used information only a few people in my family would know existed. I leaned back in my chair, letting the pieces form a pattern I didn't want to acknowledge yet. Amelia's sudden new house, Evan's arrogance, my parents insisting I take financial responsibility for everyone again. None of these events on their own meant anything, but together they created a shape too familiar to ignore, a shape I'd seen throughout my childhood, whenever my parents quietly shifted resources toward Amelia and expected me to adapt without complaint. I didn't feel anger rise this time. What I felt was sharper, quieter. Observation settling into place the way my grandmother Elise had taught me to let thoughts settle before drawing conclusions. I forwarded the email to a secure folder and locked my computer, sitting motionless as the reality crystallized. Someone in my family wasn't just overstepping, they were reaching into a part of Elise's legacy they had no right or permission to touch. And as I checked the final line of the email one more time, the confirmation was impossible to misread. The access attempt had failed, but it had absolutely been real. The quiet elegance of the Swiss private trust office in San Francisco felt almost unreal as I stepped inside, the kind of space designed to make people lower their voices without being told. And as I followed the assistant down a hallway lined with glass panels, a man rose from behind a polished desk and introduced himself as Lennox Hale. He greeted me with a calm professionalism that didn't soften or strain, and once we sat, he opened a leather-bound folder with the same steady precision I remembered from the trust officers my grandmother Elise used to meet. He told me that 8 years earlier, Elise had established a complex protection structure through their Zurich branch, a mechanism designed to preserve her estate against mismanagement or interference. And as he spoke, the language became sharper, more exact. One clause, he explained, was the core of the system. If anyone other than me attempted to access any of her holdings, the accounts would lock instantly, and transfer of control would fall to me alone. He slid several documents across the table, each bearing timestamps and authentication logs, and when I looked down, I saw details that tightened something inside my chest. According to the records, my father Richard and my sister Amelia had both submitted access requests the previous week, each one denied automatically, each one triggering the system Elise had designed, long before they had ever imagined trying to claim anything. Beneath those pages were notices showing that additional accounts tied to Amelia and her husband Evan had been frozen pending verification because the trust's fraud detection flagged their recent inquiries as potentially coordinated. Lennox's tone never changed, but the weight of what he was telling me settled with startling clarity. He said quietly, Elise prepared for this moment not as a dramatic statement, but as a fact, as if he had known her logic well enough to expect that a day like this might come. He walked me through the structure line by line, how the rights shifted, how oversight was reassigned, how every attempt to bypass the restrictions strengthened my legal authority rather than weakening it. When he finally handed me the last envelope embossed in deep green with the Zurich seal, I unfolded the document inside and saw my name printed beside a sentence that left no room for question. Effective immediately, all controlling rights to Elise Rowan's estate assets, trusts, and holdings, domestic and international, were transferred to Violet Harrington. My breath didn't quicken, but my focus refined, as if the world had drawn one clean line I could step across without hesitation. Lennox added that the activation of the clause was irreversible and fully compliant with Swiss regulations, and that my signature was the final step required to formalize authority. The pen felt steady in my hand as I signed, not because the moment was triumph, but because it confirmed something Elise must have understood about me long before I did that. I would not reach for power, but I would know what to do when it was placed in my hands. And as Lennox gathered the documents with practiced care, the truth became unmistakable. Every part of Elise's legacy now belonged to me alone. By the time I stepped out of the San Francisco office and returned to my hotel room, my phone had begun vibrating non-stop, each notification stacking over the last, until the screen looked like it was struggling to keep up. And as I set the device on the desk, another alert flashed, this one from a corporate compliance system I recognized, because Evan once bragged about how important it made him feel to oversee transactions. The message stated he had attempted to authorize a major expense, and the company had declined it due to irregularities connected to a recent freeze on several of his personal accounts. The email CC'd his supervisor and HR, noting a pending review for potential misconduct. Not long after, a news clip circulated on social media showing the charity gala Amelia had been organizing collapsing mid-event because the payment terminal rejected the card she used to secure the venue, and the video caught her embarrassed laugh as she tried to explain the issue before someone whispered that multiple cards had been declined. While I watched the clip once more, an envelope notification from the IRS appeared. The subject line read, "Request for immediate financial review, filed adjustments and discrepancies." The letter stated that certain filings under my parents' names had signaled inconsistencies, flagged automatically after Swiss institutions reported suspicious activity related to accounts tied to our family's tax identification records. Another message arrived only minutes later, this one from a regional bank notifying my father Richard that a loan he had co-signed to support Amelia and Evan's home purchase was now classified as high risk due to frozen collateral and stalled verification checks. I hadn't spoken a word to anyone since leaving the trust office, but their reactions came in loud, frantic waves. Amelia called 5 times in 3 minutes, then switched to texts accusing me of setting something off because she believed nothing like this had ever happened until I started acting distant. My mother left me a voicemail insisting that I fix whatever misunderstanding I had caused, and claimed that the IRS wouldn't be harassing the family if I hadn't been involved in Elise's accounts. My father's voicemail arrived last. His tone clipped as he demanded I return his call immediately, suggesting I was being childish, and reminding me, as always, that family problems are family responsibilities. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, letting each vibration of the phone hit the air without acknowledgement, the same way one might listen to far-off construction, present disruptive, but not worth moving for. Another notification arrived, then another, filling the room with short bursts of sound until everything finally went silent. For a moment I thought they had given up, but then the screen lit once more, this time with a single voicemail from Amelia. Her voice, normally bright and polished, broke on the second word. She said things were unraveling faster than she could control, that the bank had frozen every account with her name on it, that Evan might lose his job, that our parents were panicking because the IRS had escalated their case. A breath hitched before she added the line she'd never spoken to me in her life. Everything is falling apart. You have to help me. And then the message ended. By the time the rain pooled along the sidewalks outside my Seattle office, I already sensed the confrontation that was coming, and when the receptionist buzzed to say my family had arrived, I told her to send them in without delay. Richard, Janet, Amelia, and Evan entered together, each carrying an expression shaped to appear apologetic, though the tension in their shoulders betrayed something closer to accusation than remorse. They settled into the chairs across from my desk, and Janet began speaking first, her voice laced with forced gentleness as she insisted everything that had happened financially was a misunderstanding, that no one meant to cause trouble, and that I should have called them instead of letting things escalate. Amelia nodded quickly, adding that maybe I had overreacted because I was stressed, and she insisted they were all here to fix this as a family. Evan leaned back with an arrogance so familiar it barely registered until he crossed his arms and said, "You don't have the authority to lock the family's finances. Whatever you think you have access to isn't enough to do that." His words carried the kind of confidence only someone deeply uninformed could display, and instead of answering, I reached for the folder I had placed on the desk earlier. When I opened it, the room shifted. The deliberate calm of denial faded as I laid out the documents: authentication logs, timestamps, access attempts, and formal notices from Swiss Private Trust. I explained with measured clarity that the trust's security system had recorded every unauthorized login tied to Elise's accounts, and each one originated from devices belonging to Amelia and Richard. I showed them the fraud flags, the freeze orders, and the clause Elise had built years earlier, stating that any such attempt would immediately transfer full control to me. Amelia's face drained of color. Richard tried to interrupt with a protest about family rights, but I cut through their excuses by sliding 2 forms toward them. I presented the choices without raising my voice. The first option allows Swiss Private Trust and the IRS to pursue every irregularity, every unauthorized action, every tax discrepancy, and every financial connection discovered during the ongoing freezes. The second option sign legally binding statements relinquishing all claims to Elise's estate, acknowledge their attempts to access restricted property, agree to repay the damages outlined by the trust, and commit in writing to no longer interfere in my life or finances in any capacity. Silence held for a moment before fracturing into overlapping arguments, Janet insisting I was being cruel, Amelia pleading that she hadn't understood what she was doing, Evan muttering that this was insane, and Richard claiming Elise would never have wanted this. But the documents in front of them told a different truth, one they could not negotiate or charm their way around. Eventually, Amelia grabbed the pen, first signing with trembling strokes. Janet followed, biting her lip hard enough to leave a mark. Evan signed with a barely concealed scowl. Richard was the last to reach for the pen, and when he finally pressed it to the page, his hand shook as he said through clenched teeth, "You'll regret this, Violet." I met his stare and answered with steady certainty, "No, I won't." A week later, as I sat in my kitchen reviewing quarterly projections, a secure email from Swiss Private Trust appeared at the top of my inbox, marked with a priority flag that made me pause before opening it. And when the report expanded on my screen, the consequences of everything my family had done unfolded in stark clinical detail. The first section outlined that Amelia and Evan had officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, listing unsecured debts, far exceeding their remaining assets, and attached was the trustees' acknowledgement of frozen accounts, failed loan guarantees, and the liquidation of what little remained in their name. The next section addressed my parents. Richard and Janet were required to sell their Spokane home, an address they had boasted about for years, to cover outstanding tax liabilities triggered by discrepancies uncovered during the IRS audit, as well as restitution demanded by Swiss regulators for unauthorized access attempts. A footnote confirmed that they had already accepted an offer from a buyer significantly below market value due to the urgency of the sale. Further down the report, detailed Evan's employment termination, citing violations of internal financial conduct rules, misuse of restricted information, and failure to disclose critical conflicts of interest. The dismissal was final and barred him from reapplying in the industry for several years. Another attached document, a relocation notice filed with state authorities, revealed that my parents and Amelia's family had moved out of Washington entirely, settling temporarily in a small rental property near the Idaho-Montana border, far from the social circles they once tried desperately to impress. As I scrolled, the final section shifted focus to me. Every asset my grandmother Elise had positioned within the Zurich structure, properties, investment portfolios, long-term trusts, philanthropic funds, had now been fully transferred into a consolidated estate under my management per the activation protocol she wrote 8 years earlier. Swiss compliance officers noted the transition as complete and irreversible. The weight of that sentence settled quietly but firmly inside me. I set my laptop aside and reached for my phone, not out of concern, but to finalize what I had already decided days earlier. One by one, I blocked every number tied to my family. Email filters followed. I updated my primary address to a private mailbox service, removed personal data from public directories, and instructed my legal team to reject any correspondence that did not come through verified counsel. The silence that replaced the noise of their demands felt different now, calmer, cleaner, like a door finally and fully closed. That night, I opened the safe in my bedroom and placed Elise's pendant inside, locking it away. Not out of fear, but out of recognition that her foresight had carried me exactly to where I stood. I didn't need to wear the key anymore. Its purpose had already been fulfilled. As I shut the safe and stepped back, a single thought formed with a clarity I had never allowed myself before: a truth, neither bitter nor triumphant, simply final. Family, at least the version I had been given, was no longer a place they could return to. Not now, not ever. As the sun softened into shades of gold across my balcony, the stillness around me felt like something newly earned, and with that quiet came the certainty of what I needed to build from everything Elise had left behind. Over the following weeks, I established the Elise Rowan Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women facing financial abuse within their own households, women who had been told their dreams were too expensive, their independence unnecessary, their value tied solely to how much they could give without complaint. The fund offered legal aid, financial counseling, emergency relocation grants, and long-term career support programs, all rooted in the same principles Elise had used to guide me: clarity, resilience, and the refusal to let anyone rewrite your worth. Crafting its mission forced me to reflect on the lessons carved so deeply into my life. I realized that boundaries aren't walls meant to keep love out, but structures that allow healthy love to exist without corrosion. I learned that sacrifice is meaningful only when freely chosen, not when demanded or exploited. And I understood fully, maybe for the first time, that freedom begins the moment we step away from relationships that insist we shrink, so others can feel larger. As I sat in the fading light, I opened the small velvet box resting on my table and lifted the pendant that had once been a warning, a symbol of protection against a storm I didn't yet understand. Now it wasn't a shield. It was simply a memory, a quiet confirmation that Elise had never doubted who I would become. The metal felt warm between my fingers as though holding both the girl I had been and the woman I had grown into. The calm around me deepened, and for a long moment I let myself breathe in the peace that had always seemed out of reach. Then, with a steadying exhale, I turned my attention outward to the people who had chosen to share this journey with me. To you who stayed to hear my story, who gave your time and your presence, I want to say thank you. Stories like mine aren't easy, and if you've listened this far, it means something more than you know. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or drained by the very people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not alone. There are others who have stood where you stand, who have walked through similar losses, and who have found their way forward. Strength doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet choice to stop justifying your pain. Sometimes it's the decision to begin again. If my story offered even a small sense of recognition or hope, I'm grateful. And if you'd like to stay for more stories, ones about courage, healing, justice, and the messy, beautiful work of reclaiming our lives, you're welcome here. Subscribe if you feel called to. I'll be here sharing what I can, when I can. As the last light slipped behind the skyline, I closed my hand around the pendant and felt a peace settle that I had never known before. It was the kind of peace Elise always wished I would find. And finally I had.